This is Life Talk, and I'm Mark Crutcher, president of Life Dynamics. And as usual, I'm joined by my comical sidekick and loyal assistant, Renee Hobbs, and of course, the always delightful Destiny Hernan de la Rosa. Hello, Destiny. Before we get started, I want to pass along some sad news. You know, we've lost a lot of the early members of the pro-life movement or in the last year or so, people that have died. And one of them was a really neat guy. Not many people knew him, but Roy McMillan in Mississippi. Not many people outside of Mississippi knew who he was, but he was a really neat person. I'd known him for many years, and he would have done anything for anybody in the pro-life movement, and did do a lot of things.
Right. And it's unfortunate because we thought about him for our training.
Yeah, we did.
That we're doing.
For the intel training, we thought about bringing him in. He would have been a perfect person for that. Matter of fact, he was on our list to call.
Right.
Then he dies. For those who don't know, it's a really interesting story. He was protesting at abortion clinics in Mississippi, and one of them that he was a constant presence at. The abortionist there was Beverly McMillan, and unbelievably, they wound up getting married, and she was married to him until he died. She became pro-life, and it's a really neat story. I mean, what are the chances of that happening? If you wrote that as a Hollywood script, nobody would buy into it. But,
and the article that they came out with shouldn't be read because they have painted him a horrible picture.
Yeah, well, what'd you expect from the secular media in this country? And but anyway, for those of us who knew him and cared about him, he was a really neat guy and had a lot of interesting things to say, and we're going to miss him. But time goes on, and he's in a better place now. New article out. In Canada, the government has confirmed or documented that in just the Canadian province of Quebec alone, 216 babies were born alive during abortions from 2000 to 2012 and left to die afterwards. Now, what you have to understand is that this is something we see in the United States too. And we documented it down there in Houston.
With Douglas Carpin.
With Douglas Carpin, that's right. And this is just one province in Canada. The whole country of Canada has less than 10% of the population of the United States. So if you just extrapolate the numbers out, I mean, there's no difference in the Canadian abortion provision system than there is in the United States. That means we're seeing this, as we said in the situation with Carpin, this is a common occurrence.
Yes.
Where these babies are born alive.
Right.
And in the case of Carpin, he pushes his thumb through the soft spot of their head to kill them, or he crushes their thorax or twists their head off or whatever.
Right. And I think we've talked about this before. It's often safer for the abortionist.
Yeah, not for the baby. The baby's
no. Yeah. Of course not.
Right. It's safer for the abortionist.
Right.
And that's why they do these things. They'll actually induce create a situation where the baby is more likely to be born alive. Right. One of the interesting things is that Quebec is now finding out that there was an 8.6% rise in the overall infant mortality rate during this period of time, from 2000 to 2012. And what they're now attributing it to is there was a 20-fold increase in the number of babies born alive after abortions. And they're counting those against the infant mortality rate. I guarantee you they're going to change that.
Right.
They're going to change that because they do not want this being counted against the infant mortality rate. But it just shows the abject.
Right.
I don't know how you even describe these people.
I think the horrifying thing that I was exposed to a few years ago is it's not just the abortionists who advertise this. Of course, in Canada, you just go to a regular doctor because abortion's legal through all 9 months, and they don't have specific clinics. Here in the States, we have 4 doctors now who do late-term abortions, and advertise that way, but really I think we probably have something very similar to Canada. I remember going in for my the test where you have to drink the glucose when I was pregnant with my daughter Eddie, and sitting in the waiting room, I was talking to this girl, and this was the doctor that our pregnancy center referred women to. He was supposed to be a very pro-life doctor and accepted Medicaid and all that. So I'm sitting in the lobby while I drank the stuff, and then you have to wait an hour until they check your sugar levels. There's another girl in there, and we're talking about how much we just really enjoyed this doctor, how great he was, and she said, yeah, I found out about him when he delivered my brother's baby. A few years ago, it was a terrible situation, and the baby wasn't going to live, so he went ahead and delivered him. And I was like, hold on, like a live birth abortion? And she said, no, the baby had this disease, and so what he did was he went ahead and he induced her labor a few months early so that, she could deliver the baby. And I said, so that's an abortion. And she kept, kind of arguing with me. She's like, no, the baby was going to die anyway. That's not what it is at all. He induced her early. Had he not induced her early, that baby wasn't going to die on that particular day. And I think, like I said, I think it's maybe done as a merciful act by a lot of these physicians, but this was a regular doctor who we called a pro-life doctor in our community, and he was still doing live birth abortions.
That's a perversion of compassion.
Absolutely.
Is what that is. And, but these people, it says nothing. I've stated here before that one of the harms that abortion has done to us as a culture, it has destroyed respect for human life, not only in the culture, but within the medical community. When you have trained physicians that can participate in this sort of thing,
Right.
They have completely destroyed whatever humanity they have.
And euthanasia of the elderly or the sick. Yeah.
It's put a value on human life, and is it worth it to us or not?
And Obama is for this. He doesn't want a woman that goes in for an abortion to be burdened by a child that is born alive. She made the decision to have the abortion, and she doesn't need to be burdened in taking care of this child.
Right. Well, back during the, this was before you came to Life Dynamics, but back during the hearings over partial birth abortion, this argument came up. Rick Santorum brought this argument up in the hearings in Congress, and others brought it up in the Senate. And they were asking these pro-aborts, let's say that you put this baby in the birth canal with feet hanging out, but the head's still in, so this is technically still an abortion, right? And you try to kill this child, and so that when you bring him out, he's dead. But let's say he slips out. Now you've got a living late-term baby here that may be able to survive.
Right.
Are we required to now try to save this baby? And you had Dianne Feinstein, Barbara Boxer, all these hardcore, godless leftist pro-aborts saying, no, we cannot allow that baby to survive. And basically what they were saying was, and I think some of them actually even stated this, that woman went into that procedure for a dead baby. She's entitled to a dead baby.
Right. Yeah, and this is exactly what Jill Stanek would talk about at the hospital she worked at, having to go into the room and hold that baby until it died.
Right.
Well, and honestly, what they're saying is the consistent line of thought. And what I think the American public has to wake up to is, why are we okay with them ripping a baby to shreds inside the mother's womb, but you go 3 inches further and suddenly it's a live baby and we're poking stuff through its soft spot or twisting its head off, and then it's barbaric? Like, why was it not barbaric when we were killing it inside of its mother? What is the difference?
That's the point. And that's why I had some pro-life people get angry with me one time on a segment that we did here several years ago when they said, oh, they're killing live babies. So wait a minute. Your position is supposed to always be that they're killing live
That is
babies.
abortion.
That baby's no more alive when it's outside the womb than it was when it was inside the womb. So you're buying into their magical vagina argument, that something mystical happens as this baby exits the birth canal, right?
Right.
You're buying into their argument. They're always live babies that are being killed in abortion. We had a story out of the Charlotte Observer newspaper. This author had done a story about who among the people who are in the presidential races now are going to get the Christian vote, so-called Christian vote. And he broke it down to conservative Protestants, liberal Protestants, conservative Catholics, liberal Catholics, African Americans, and so forth. And one of his arguments was that some Christian denominations or Christian groups of people are going to be supporting people like Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders. These are Christian people supporting them. And this article, to me, symbolizes the problem of one of the problems that the pro-life movement has had in not doing a better job of making the argument, and it is an unassailable argument, that there's no such thing as a pro-choice Christian. When the choice is the murder of an innocent human being, there's no such thing as a pro-choice Christian.
Okay, but I would argue this isn't the failings of the pro-life movement. This is the failings of the GOP. The fact that we continue to elect quote-unquote pro-life candidates and nothing changes, then you have people who are saying, look, if I elect Hillary and she gives all this free stuff out to women and everything, maybe that will do something. Maybe that will lower the number of abortions.
Right.
Because we have been let down by a GOP who actually is, claims to be pro-life, but it's nothing more than lip service.
Right.
I think this is a mute argument anyways, honestly. You vote on your moral conscience. You don't kill children,
Right.
period.
Period. End of story.
Period.
Right. Right. You're right. It is a failure of the Republican Party. They've lied to us. As I've said, and I say in my new book, Siege, we've been stabbed in the back more often by the Republicans than we've been stabbed in the chest by the Democrats. But the fact is, I have seen pro-life people on national television debating someone who talks about their strong Christian values, but they're pro-choice. And they never bring up the fact, you're a liar. You cannot be pro-choice and talk to me about your strong Christian values because you don't have them.
Where are the people calling, Donald 2 Corinthians Trump a liar, who has no moral compass whatsoever, is totally pro-choice? And I'm sorry, if given the option between someone like him and Hillary Clinton, maybe I just won't vote, I'll write somebody in, but I do understand why there are people who would say, I think we will see less abortions under Hillary Clinton than this person who's a misogynist, who owns strip clubs, who, has been on the cover of Playboy, all of these other ways that he's exploited women. I understand people buying into that thought that you have to choose between the lesser of two evils and what ultimately is going to lead to fewer abortions. And it's a sad day when there is zero difference in moral compass between the two parties.
Yeah, well, and we talk about this. Where I first started picking up on this was during the Carter administration. When Jimmy Carter, you're talking about Playboy, when Jimmy Carter sits down for an interview with Playboy magazine and talks about his pro-choice position, and at the same moment, nobody's calling him on his argument that he's this Southern Baptist, conservative, Christian, adult Sunday school teacher in his church, and nobody's calling him on this? Nobody's calling him out on this? I mean, to me, that's where this whole argument kind of started. Let's also go to something else here that we've talked about before, because we're seeing this continue to go on. We've talked before about this JICI study that was supposedly done here in Texas that showed over 100,000 women tried to self-abort. And the pro-aborts are trying to use this study that was no study at all. It was the most incredible deception I've ever seen in trying to make an argument based on statistics. But the pro-aborts are continuing to use this around the country as a justification for not passing pro-life laws. During a recent interview, Democratic National Chairman Debbie Wasserman Schultz related to this and said that this was an example of what happens when you pass these kind of draconian measures. Draconian meaning you can't have an abortion after 28 weeks or whatever. That's draconian to them. And then you had the Tarina King, Executive Director of Nair Allen Pro-Choice Virginia. Quote, recently, research out of Texas revealed that due to the rapidly declining number of women's health centers in that state, over 100,000 women have attempted to self-induce abortions in the past year alone. Even the people that conducted the study didn't make that argument.
I mean, if anything, I think it proves our point that either A, women are much better than these, shoddy doctors are at performing their own abortions, or, they're hiding the bodies really well. Because if there's 100,000 abortions, which, by the way, as we talked about on previous episodes, it was, do you know anybody who's maybe ever tried to fall downstairs? I mean, it was that large of a range, and everybody said, yeah, my sister's cousin's brother's girlfriend one time, took NyQuil and tried to have an abortion. It was everything in the world fell into that. Right. But again, if that's the case, where are these streets laden with dead bodies that we're just not seeing? If anything, we're seeing many more ambulances leaving the abortion clinics that are supposedly so safe.
It's unbelievable. When they didn't get the results that they wanted, by asking women, have you ever attempted to self-abort? They didn't get the results they wanted. They went back and asked them, do you know of anyone that you think might have a self-aborted? The other thing is, it's interesting to note that these numbers, even no matter what the numbers would be, and they certainly wouldn't be the numbers here that they've come up with, they'd be a lot higher in Texas than any other state because we border Mexico. And Mexico, you can go into Mexico and buy these drugs over the counter that you can't buy in the United States. So in South Texas, you might have women who you say, yeah, I know a friend of mine that went into Mexico and bought mifepristol or whatever and tried to self-abort. So therefore, she tried to self-abort. whether you know that for a fact or not, you would have been counted as a plus in
Right.
this deal.
But who's to say that the person you know who tried to self-abort and the person I know who tried to self-abort is
Aren't
not
the
the
same
same
person.
person? But
Right.
then we're going to say 100,000 women. Like, it's just such an outlandish number.
There's absolutely no. It could be 10 people. If you had a girl that had 10 friends and all her
Yeah.
friends knew that she tried to self-abort, and they asked all 10 of
Every
them,
single one of them, yeah.
then they would have counted her 10 times. And it's unbelievable that people are falling for this. But the fact is, what the pro-aborts know is that because they control the secular media, they can go out and make any kind of outrageous statement like this, and nobody's going to call them on it.
Right.
Nobody's going to say, wait a minute, let's back up from this.
People believe
I
it.
think it goes to your argument that I've heard you say before that abortion needs to be a mile wide and an inch deep. Like, we need a culture that thinks that their sister and best friend and mother and everyone else, like, either has had an abortion or needs access to it, so that we can keep fighting for that. Even
Right.
if at the end of the day we look around and realize, oh, this wasn't actually people I knew, and this whole study is basically, in my opinion, based on like urban legend of
Right.
I knew somebody who did something one time.
Right.
That's not real.
It's
That's not a real
unbelievable.
thing.
Another way that the pro-aborts is Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who
That is the second time you've almost called Debbie Wasserman Schultz Destiny.
Destiny.
I just want to point out
okay,
this
no,
is
I didn't almost call her
unacceptable.
Destiny. But anyway, she is one of the most disgraceful human beings I've ever known. She's complaining lately, and this is another example of the dishonesty of these people. She's complaining lately that, yes, the pro-lifers are gaining all these younger people, especially younger women. And like if you went to the March for Life this year, you saw tons of young people everywhere, and a lot of them were young females.
Mm-hmm.
And she's saying that these young women are complacent on the abortion issue.
Mm-hmm.
They're not complacent. They've rejected it.
That's right.
There is a distinction between saying, I don't care, but if you're looking at the March for Life and there's a whole bunch of young females there, those females aren't saying, we don't care about abortion, we're complacent on it. No, they're saying we reject it.
Right.
And that's what she doesn't want people to understand.
Right.
And the media is not calling her on that.
Right. Yeah, the arguments that she's making, that they're there to support somebody that may have had an abortion, a brother or sister or cousin or somebody, that they're just there in support of them. They're not really pro-life.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they've got all these justifications for what they're doing. I want to talk about the situation that everybody is seeing right now with David Daleiden in the situation in Houston, where they were supposedly investigating Planned Parenthood's marketing of dead baby parts. And if the grand jury did a flip and said, no, we're not going to do anything about Planned Parenthood, but we're going to go after the guys that revealed this, and they're going to indict him. And Planned Parenthood and other people in the abortion industry are trying to use RICO, the RICO statutes, to go after David Daleiden. And for those who may not be aware of it, RICO was passed in the early 1970s as a mechanism for the federal government to go after the Mafia primarily, but also anybody involved in organized crime. And at the time, the biggest opponents of it were people on the godless left. People like Ted Kennedy. I'll just use him as one example. He just one of many that opposed it at the time. And he said, look, wait a minute. If we pass this RICO statute, the government will be able to go after people who protest, people who picket. What they were concerned about was unions. They said they'll be able to go after trade unions because they'll be interfering with the business operation over here. They don't have to have an illegal predicate act in order to be guilty of RICO. You can just go after somebody's business and you can be guilty of RICO. And he opposed it, and he was going to vote against it. And he had a bunch of liberals and a whole bunch of conservatives were saying, no, RICO's dangerous. And so the people who were pushing RICO went to them and said, okay, look, we'll put a provision in there that says the only reason the government can go after somebody under RICO will be if they have a financial stake in the issue. In other words, if they're trying to do some act against some organization or some business or whatever, and they have a financial interest in succeeding at that, then you can go after them for RICO. But if they don't, then you can't. And the theory behind that was, since you had, let's say you had animal rights protesters or pro-lifers or unions, since they don't have like us, we don't have a financial interest in going after the abortion industry, then we couldn't be susceptible to RICO. And so people like Ted Kennedy changed their mind and said, okay, as long as we put that protection in there so it doesn't violate the First Amendment, then I'm okay with it. And so they passed RICO. And then, lo and behold, along comes Now versus Scheidler, our friend Joe Scheidler in Chicago. And Now goes after him under RICO. And the argument was, wait a minute, Pro-Life Action League and Joe Scheidler have no financial interest, so RICO doesn't apply. And they actually got court rulings that said, no, you can use it for that. And by the way, the people that supported that were the Ted Kennedys of the world. Ted Kennedy was one of them that supported using RICO, which he said you cannot use to go after picketers and protesters if they're on the left. He said, but you can use it to go after pro-lifers. And he supported the use of RICO and Now versus Scheidler. This thing went on for, what was it, Renee?
28 years.
28 years.
Were they trying to say that Joe did have a vested
No,
interest,
they're
or
saying-
they said they don't even care, they're going to disregard that altogether?
Right, they're saying
Okay.
you don't have to have a financial interest.
Okay.
That you can just go after them using RICO. Well, once you did that, then RICO just opens up to anybody.
Yeah.
You can go after anybody basically for anything if you can show they did it across state lines. Or you can show it as being an enterprise. It took 3 Supreme Court rulings before they before they stopped going after Joe Scheidler. And the pro-aborts used up tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of pro-life money. They never believed for a moment, I'll never be convinced, that the people who were doing this, and I knew some of them, I mean, these are the most morally bankrupt degenerates you've ever seen in your life. They never believed for a minute they could win this thing. But what they knew was they could drag it out for years and years and years, and pro-lifers would feel compelled to put money into that, into Joe's defense, and that would be money, since there's not a bottomless pit of money in the pro-life movement, any dollar you put into that, you don't put into the normal pro-life activities. And it would drain the resources of other pro-life organizations, including Joe's. This money is getting sucked up by the lawyers. And so at the end of this thing, after the 28 years and the 3rd Supreme Court ruling and Now finally had to back down, I guarantee you they sat in a room somewhere and laughed and said, yeah, we didn't win. We never thought we were going to win. But look what we cost them. For 28 years, we cost them millions of dollars a year.
And this is where we're going with CMP.
That's where we're going with the Center for Medical Progress and David Daleiden. They don't believe for a minute, I think, that he'll ever go to jail or that he'll ever be, found guilty of RICO or whatever. This thing can wind on for years. But the point of it is to drain resources away from the pro-life movement. That's what this is about. They know they can't win this deal. We're not going to get into the details, but you and I warned David about this, and we told him, don't go to the law enforcement community with this thing.
Yes.
Not because you've done anything wrong,
Right.
but because you're giving the pro-aborts the way out of the trap, because you're never going to get an indictment in any law enforcement agency in the United States again on this issue, because the way the statutes are written on the trafficking of parts, you can't indict them because the way that the loophole is, they can donate the part to you and then recover reasonable retrieval fees, right? So theoretically, they could say, okay, you want these babies' eyes. We're not going by that price list that Life Dynamics exposed 15 years ago. The eyes out of that baby are $50,000. Well, that's ridiculous. And if they paid it, you'd say, yeah, they bought those eyes for $50,000. But the way the statute reads, what this company is saying is, we'll donate the eyes to you, but we'll charge you $50,000 to retrieve them. And since the retrieval agency is the one that gets to establish what's reasonable fees, then they can set them at anything they want to. But the way the statutes read, you'll never get a conviction. And one element of a criminal indictment is a reasonable expectation of a conviction. And this is what we tried to tell David, you're not going to get that. The argument that should have been made here, and if this argument had been made, this thing would have just exploded 10 times as big as it did, and would still be going on. The argument that should have been made is, you go out and you show all these videos to the public, and you say, look at what these people are doing. Look how outrageous this is. And you want to know the biggest outrage? What they're doing is legal. You'd have had people rioting over this, maybe. You'd have had the public saying, wait a minute, that's legal to do that? It's legal to sell those baby parts? We got to do something about that. And instead of going to law enforcement, you go to the legislatures and said, and say to them, look, the public in your jurisdiction is outraged about this. You got to do something about it. And pass laws then that you could go after them criminally in the future. But when they went out here and said, we want law enforcement to indict these people for criminal activity, we told him beforehand that was never going to happen. That was never going to happen, and it never is. They can investigate till the cows come home, but you have no expectation of a conviction because they're the ones who get to establish what the reasonable retrieval fees are.
I think that's a great point. So rather than saying they did something illegal, we need to be pointing out this isn't illegal and it should be illegal.
That's the outrage.
Yeah.
That is the outrage here.
Yeah.
And if they had been doing that, this thing would still be going on. I think, and people may think I'm nuts, I think that it's blown over now. I think the explosion's gone. But the other thing is, I hate to say this, but there was an article in the Dallas paper the other day that I brought and showed to you that made this very point. Mm-hmm. Planned Parenthood's going to come out of this thing in better shape than what they went into it with. Because they're going to play the victim, and you can see this across the country right now, and you can see their stooges in the media playing into it. Mm-hmm. Poor, hapless Planned Parenthood attacked by these evil pro-lifers, right? And even in a state like Texas with a very pro-life attorney general, a very pro-life governor, a pro-life state legislature, they went after Planned Parenthood and found out they did nothing criminal, but while they were doing it, they found out these people were violating the law, and they went after them.
Right.
And Planned Parenthood is going to come off and look like the victim, and I wouldn't be surprised if their funding goes up instead of goes down. And so that's the problem that you get when you misuse what you've gotten here. And you know, David did great work. I mean, nobody can deny what he did. I mean, but the follow through on it was poor. And this is kind of like a football team that marches down the field running the ball and then gets down on the 1 yard line and throws a pass and gets it intercepted and loses the game because of that. And then look at last year's Super Bowl, and you can see a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, they did everything right, and David did a lot of really good things and a lot of right things, and he's a good guy. And he didn't violate RICO, in my view, but he did everything right, but then he threw an interception when he got down on the 2 yard line. And he changed strategies and didn't listen to what should have been done. But it also makes the point, Renee, and you had a conversation with somebody that called in about our intel training the other day. Mm-hmm. And we won't mention this person's name because a lot of people may know who they are. But they're coming to the intel training, or they're supporting the intel training, may actually make some donations to help us push it, who are saying we can't be doing, and we never mentioned the Daleiden situation to him.
You're right.
But he told you.
Yes, he did.
He said, we can't be doing this again.
Right.
We've got to be smarter about it.
Right.
And that's the point that we're trying to make with this intel training.
Right.
Everything that you want to do, when you're trying to do undercover work, you're trying to accomplish a certain task, and you say, well, here's the way we can accomplish that, but that's illegal. If we do that, we're going to get tagged. That's illegal activity. Okay, fine, then don't do it that way. Look for another way to do it that is legal. Mm-hmm. And in the 25 years or so that we've been doing this type of work, I've never seen anything that we wanted to do that when we looked at it and said, oh, that's illegal, that we couldn't find a legal way to do it.
Right.
And so that's the sort of thing that we're going to be teaching in this intel training. And it's also to understand what you have when you're done. And I think this is the fundamental mistake that David made. When he gathered all this stuff, he didn't analyze it and say, okay, now what have I got and how can I use it? He just gathered all this stuff and said, here's what I want to do with it. Mm-hmm. I want to get these people indicted. Mm-hmm. Instead of saying, what have I got and how can we use it? If he had done that, he would have taken a different tact and this thing would have been much bigger. But he's a good guy, and I think he's going to be around the pro-life movement for a long time, and he's going to learn from this experience. And it's not that we're brilliant here. It's just that we've made these mistakes ourselves. When we first started out, we made mistakes doing undercover work. And that's why this intel training, I think, is going to be so important. Right. And it's coming up here in just, about 3 weeks is going to be our first one.
Yep. Are we going to get to hang from wires and learn to do that Mission Impossible thing?
Oh, yeah, that's right. And you get all this neat electronic stuff. You're going to have a shoe that's got a camera in it and a phone. And oh man.
Like a watch, like a go-go gadget?
Yeah, it's going to be amazing.
Sign me up.
Right. You're already
You are.
I know, I'm already there.
You're already signed up. No, let me tell you something about intelligence work. It doesn't work like that. As you know, you've been around. It doesn't work like that. It's not glamorous. There's no James Bond moments. You know, you're not going to be driving an Aston Martin with a really good-looking girl beside you, and all that. That's not the way it works. Most of it is grunt work, and some of it's boring and it's tedious, and that's more common than the James Bond type stuff.
Yeah.
You know, so if that's what you're thinking, then you just
Unsign me up. Never mind.
Huh?
No, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
Keep me signed up.
You're signed up. You're going. Anyway, we're completely out of time, obviously. In fact, we ran over, but it was a good show. Thanks. Appreciate it. We'll see you next time.
All right.
Well, that's all the time we have for now. For daily news updates, go to prolifeamerica.com. Until next time, remember, Life Dynamics is not here to put up a good fight. We're here to win, because winning is how this killing is going to stop. Thank you.